Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to our Blessing of the Animals service, and today we also will celebrate the life of Saint Francis of Assisi. It's always a pleasure to be with you, and this is one of my favorite Sundays of the year, to be focusing on those that we truly love and purely love, and move out of that space of fear, which unfortunately is impacting a lot of us, and to move into that space of connection. So I have a prayer space in my home. Many of you have seen it. If not, please come by and I will show it to you, share it with you. I go to it every day I can, and I've been doing this for the last 14 years. It's my respite. It's where I go to remember who I am and what I commit to being. It's where I connect to what I understand as the divine. And in this space, I keep just one prayer. It's on this little card here. And it's the prayer we sang in the interlude. It's the prayer become known as the prayer of St. Francis, make me an instrument of thy peace. It happens to be on my father's prayer card. Mother Teresa recited this prayer every day. Margaret Thatcher cited it upon becoming the Prime Minister of Britain, and the AA Big Book uses this prayer in its writings and in its support. Interestingly, though, St. Francis did not write the prayer of St. Francis. The author is anonymous. It came to being, and it was first printed in 1912 during World War I, when the world was longing for a peace prayer. So we'll never know who the author is. But what better way to get into the conversation with these words of this extraordinary prayer as we explore the life of St. Francis of Assisi. So how many of you know about the life of St. Francis? Please raise your hand. All right, we have 1, 2, 3, a little bit, 4. So the man who would become St. Francis of Assisi was born in 1182, and he died in 1226 at the young age of 44. His father was a prominent silk merchant who traveled much of Italy and France, and he was very wealthy and successful. So St. Francis's name was not Francis at birth, it was Giovanni. But because he spent so much time in Provence, in the south of France, and in places in France, he became known as Francesco, the Frenchman, because he had this great love of France. And that was the name he began his life with, and also ended it. As a young man, Francis was known to be somewhat of a playboy, ran around with the women, liked to dance and drink and have a good old time. Very carefree, and enjoyed his wealth. But war came to Assisi, and he enlisted like all the young men did at that time in his life. And he was involved in horrific battles. He was taken in as a prisoner and imprisoned and in a very small enclosure for a year, where he became profoundly ill. And something happened to him during that time in captivity. He became a different man. And when he returned to Assisi, broken and altered, things started to change for St. Francis. He had a religious awakening, and he went into a chapel that was falling apart. It was in a disarray. And he felt that the crucifix had spoken to him, and it said to him, I need you to rebuild my church. And Francis looked around and thought, wow, yeah, this place needs to be rebuilt. And he started tending to that physical space there. And eventually he realized that that was much more than that church that he was being called to do, to work. Francis was horrified by the leper colonies when he was a younger man, because there were many there. He would always ensure he was 1 mile to 2 miles away from them. as many people did. They were terrified of him. And somehow, after his spiritual awakening, Francis began to meet God in his own life. He'd approach lepers and he would embrace them. He would kiss their hands and wash their wounds. He said he met God in the disfigured hand of the leper. He was known to have said that in the kiss of the leper's hand, it was that kiss that made the bitter of life sweet. Francis rejected everything that his father insisted that he carry in his wealth. And he took a life of poverty. He actually stripped in the town square and gave all of his clothing and all of his possessions back to his father and said, I have none of this. And he used a begging bowl, or however he begged, but he begged for anything he was to have. It was just an offering to those that had nothing. Mm-hmm. He received a papal approval to preach, which was rarely offered to anybody in those days. That was not ordained, but he received that. The Pope saw true spirituality in this barefoot prophet. Francis eventually developed followers and ultimately the Franciscan order. So in 1219, this I think is interesting, he went to Egypt in an attempt to convert the Sultan Camille to put an end to the conflict of the Fifth Crusade. And when he got there, instead of meeting someone that he felt would be the other person, the bad guy, he learned that El Camille was a devout Sufi. And this Sufi sultan welcomed Francis, and they became friends. Instead of being opposites, they found their way to one. They found the merging of their two spiritual paths. There's a wonderful film, you can catch it on Amazon. It's called The Sultan and the Saint, if you ever get a chance. You might have to pay a few dollars to watch it, but it's an excellent film, so I highly recommend it. Francis returned from his pilgrimage from the Holy Land only to begin to lose his eyesight. And sometime around then, he received what is called the stigmata. Does anybody know what the stigmata is? Yes. So the stigmata is the wounds of Jesus. Spontaneously, his hands and feet began to bleed, along with a piercing on his side. And he died blind of leprosy at the age of 44. So the thing about St. Francis is the thing that I think lights up people about St. Francis is he didn't just talk and preach, he walked the walk. Mm-hmm. And there's something about being in the presence of somebody that really walks the walk that they don't even have to say a word, right? Just their being awakens you. And it doesn't even have to be religious, right? It's just when somebody has that ability. When I think of somebody walking the walk, I think of Al Starsky. That was a man who walked the walk, and we were in the company of that man. So, but there's much to that. So, how did St. Francis of Assisi become the patron saint of animals? How did this whole blessing of the animals thing happen? Well, it began out of these possibly myths, possibly true stories about his interactions with animals. And one of the things about Francis is he saw God's presence in all of creation. He viewed all creatures, not just humans, as his spiritual family. And he referred to these creatures and parts of the universe as his brothers and sisters, from the animals to the sun and the moon. So many of us are accustomed to seeing Francis depicted with these animals around him, and often it's birds and wolves. So I think it was in 1209, Francis was preaching the gospel to a bunch of folks, and people weren't listening to him. So he got annoyed, and he said, you know what, I'm not going to preach to all of you. I'm going to preach to the birds. And the birds that were there were the crows and the starlings. And has anybody ever been around a flock of starlings? They're one of the noisiest things, endless chatter. They just consume you. It's like, oh my God, what is this? And the word is, or the story goes, that these birds didn't utter a sound. They went silent and just listened to Francis. And that's how the story of the birds came about, is that even the birds knew enough to stop and listen. And then there's the story of Francis and the wolf. So there was a wolf that was attacking the villagers and the livestock and the animals around Assisi, in that area. And he was terrorizing the town. So the townspeople decided, we're going to get a posse together, we're going to go kill the wolf. And Francis told the villagers that he would speak to the wolf. So as the story goes. And so he headed up into the forest to have a talk with the wolf. And a team of men accompanied him. The further they went into the woods, the more terrified the men became and retreated in fear. And then Francis, as they said, reached the wolf's territory. He called out to the wolf. He stood there fearlessly, called out to the wolf. And the story goes, is that the wolf came and laid itself by Francis's feet, and they had a conversation. And somehow an agreement was made with the wolf, who was just hungry, that if the townspeople would just leave some food for the wolf, he wouldn't bother anymore. And if the townspeople also agreed not to harm him, he would not. And so it went on, and so the story went, that this agreement made between Francis and the wolf created a whole nother experience for this town, and they all went on to live in peace. And so the fables go on with St. Francis. He did things very differently than, let's say, any other holy man had before him. St. Francis invited us to consider deeply connecting to other beings, whether they were lepers, wolves, birds, or the sultan of an opposing religion or army. St. Francis inspires us to open our hearts in ways we may not have considered. That perhaps the other, whether it was any of those things, is not truly separate from us. He awakens us to the possibility of connection in a way that many religious or spiritual leaders hadn't presented it to folks belong or in this capacity. So we human beings long for connection, right? Let's face it. It's a core part of who we are. And what do we love more naturally than children and animals? Other human beings? Children and animals, oh, yes. So for my family, animals were the ticket. They were always at the center. I mean, I'm sure they loved us kids, but, those animals, they loved them. So when my father left Sudan, my father's from Sudan, my mother's from Egypt, for those of you who don't know this. And my father left Sudan to visit a family he had met when he was young, and it happened to be my mother's family. And he met my mom and started courting her. And my mom asked him if he happened to have pictures of his parents in his wallet, and he said no. He says, but I have my dogs. And he showed my mom, Raffle and Susie, his, I think one was a little terrier and the other was a Dalmatian. And the deal was done. They got engaged and married. Growing up, my brother Lionel brought home every creature he could get his hands on. My mother could barely take it. Dogs, cats, birds, turtles, caterpillars, guinea pigs. Mom said no to most of them. We were allowed to keep Tina, the guinea pig, who I would put on a leash and walk around the neighborhood because I wanted a dog so badly. And then my parents finally got a Great Dane. And we lived in Manhattan in a walk-up building. Yeah, I know. We were the only apartment that wasn't robbed in that building back then in the 70s. and her name was Misty, and she was protective and loyal and deeply loved, and she only lived 6 years. My parents loved that dog more than life itself, and I have to say, it was the only time in my life where I saw my father just weep when that dog left this world. I know it's not just me, right? But many of us have had similar touching, life-changing stories about our relationship with our pets and animals. Even if we didn't grow up with pets ourselves, many of us found ways to zoos or the homes of friends or to bring animals into our lives. They protect us, they teach us. And as we come to the end of this talk in our service today, and continue our journey alongside of our animal companions, may we open our hearts and minds to the wisdom they offer us in just by being who they are. And in witnessing them, may we find a deeper sense of purpose, connection, and may we awaken to the possibility of this experience of unconditional love in our lives. Thank you, everyone. May it be so. If you like this video, please like us on YouTube, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and click on the bell to be notified whenever we post a new video. Thank you.